Hello. Good. What time is it? 3 o'clock. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. Just getting started up here with a new file. I need to port this file over from my computer, so bear with me here. All right, I've got the file imported. I switch over here. Okay, so this is another one I'm going to be restructuring a bit. So this is another piece that I don't think anybody has seen. Although, actually, I do think I was working on this one during a live stream years ago. So I'm basically going to be redoing it a little bit here and giving it the same kind of treatment as the other spread. So got to bring it up to the current style. So I'm going to do this the same way that I did before. I just have a flat layer in here that shows me the old art, and then I'm going to basically just restructure and redraw this kind of from scratch again. And I have some ideas that I'm going to be changing with it. So we'll work that out today. Hello, hello. Hey, Lonely Goomba. Good to see you. Echo. You mean like reverb, or you can hear it echoing over and over again? You had a plane on Twitter. Oh, yeah. I'm trying to figure out how to get Periscope connected with this because I'm using this system called StreamYard, which allows me to broadcast on multiple platforms at once, which is really, really great. So I can be on YouTube, I can be on Facebook and Periscope, but I have this weird problem with Periscope where for some reason it's pointing to my Ron Twitter account, like the Ron handle. So it's got my correct account, the Dream Prism Press account, but it's pointing to my DM Combo handle. And I don't know how to fix it. I tried everything from canceling the account, but every time I go to start it back up again, it just reconnects to the DM Combo one. So I don't really know what to do there. I don't know what to do. All right, so I'm restructuring this a little bit. I'm going to think about kind of rethinking the pose a little bit. I do like the pose quite a bit. And it's fun because, as I said before, it's a little bit, it's kind of impossible. It's not impossible to do this pose, but it's not something that a normal person, I guess, in general would take. So it's unusual, and that helps give sort of an air of mysticism to the character. So I'm not opposed to what I did here. And if I can't really think of a way to improve something that I've already done, then my job is basically just to bring it up to speed with the current style so that it will sync up. That's pretty much it. Hey, Banana Meteor, what's going on? What's going on? She's a little elongated compared to the current design. So as I'm redrawing it, I kind of have to resize here and there. So that's kind of challenging. Lonely Goomba, you've got to give me like a tiny fraction of your followers. That would be really helpful. Doing some art while you do some art. The only way to watch an art stream. Yep. That's good. Yeah. It's really, really good to watch these kinds of things where just people are just creating things. Mine, anybody's, because it really kind of gives you a little kick. It makes you excited to work on your own stuff. At least that's how it goes with me. You can retweet if you like. That'd be great. I don't. Are your followers going to? I mean, I'm half joking, of course. But only half joking. But yeah, you could say just tell everyone that I'm working on a new Zelda game, and they should come and check out what it is, and then they can slowly start to realize that I am full of lies. But that'll bring them over. But I mean, once they've clicked in, come on, may as well stick around. Come on, I'm drawing rainbow hair. Stick around for the rainbow hair. So I have to ask you, since you're here, I watched one of your recent videos, which is awesome. How are you doing your animation, like lip syncing and that sort of thing? It's like, are you using some sort of an automation process for that, or are you hand keying it? So I can't imagine that you could do that much hand keyed and not have it take forever. First time seeing me draw. Yeah. You do it frame by frame. Oh man. That's got to take a long time. Have you ever looked into any automation features? That's another way of doing it, yeah. I bet that got boring. I see. Okay, so it looks more complicated than it is then. Yeah, they don't get it right, but that's just kind of it. Is and take this as the thought process that I intend it to be. But are people going to be concerned if the mouth movement is a little bit off? It's like if you think about the savings that you could get if you were to work with some kind of an automation system. I wonder if that would be worth your time. Just a thought. But I haven't worked with that in a while. I used to work in animation, and the kind of stuff that we would do, really, you kind of had to do it by hand. But that's because it was a specific kind of thing that called for that. I'm listening to music from this game called Giraffe and Annika, which I played a bit of last night. I love finding these kind of obscure, unusual games that have an interesting mechanic that it kind of just works. I find them interesting. I like being introduced to those kinds of non-large budget projects where you can tell the team was passionate about it but kind of lacked the resources to make it something that was really fancy or too long. But the game's pretty neat. It was like it started out it's short, but it started out as I kind of thought like, okay, I know where this is going. And it was a little oversimplistic, but the more I played, the more I got into it. Because it just kept doing some just surprising enough things that it was a joy. A scene of animated? Well, most of what I did with Insomniac, for example, was layout and storyboarding. So a lot of the stuff was in the previs end of things. Although there were some scenes that I animated. There was one that seems to always come up that people seem to really love. That was from Ratchet and Clank Future 2, where Clank activates the cryosleep function on the on the ship. Basically, they're going to have to travel for a while, and so Ratchet ends up activating the cryosleep function. Or I think if I remember correctly, it gets activated automatically, and the Ratchet gets knocked out, and then Clank giggles because he says, that he cryosleep doesn't work on robots, and then he ends up getting. I literally just had like a. It was it was so stupidly cartoony, but I had an actual boxing glove just shoot out of the glove compartment, and it knocks out Clank. It was super short, and I don't know. It was very funny to me. It was mostly funny to me that they let me do that. Because whenever you have a larger scale development like that, everything kind of has to be reviewed and checked, and you got to make sure that it's all on model and everybody's on the same page and agrees that it's something that will work within the context of the game. And then you also have to make sure that you're checking with designers too, and that you're not doing a cutscene in some place where it will get in the way of a planned barrier or wall or something. Or maybe would get a set to lay out a cutscene. This is a very frequent occurrence, as we would get like a a set, like a region that was kind of half finished, but we'd have to get going on the cutscenes because of our time constraints, and we would work with kind of an unfinished set. And then what would happen inevitably is design would need to change the distance between structures or something, and so maybe we had a hallway that a cutscene was taking place in that's now half the distance. So when that kind of thing would happen, we'd have to go in and move everything. So there was a lot of that kind of thing. So there's quite a bit of work, just in terms of restructuring scenes that needed to be restructured, but most of my work was in the layout end of things. And then there were some other scenes that I animated, but it's tough for me to figure out how to identify them for you, because we didn't, we had working names for the cutscenes, but I don't for the life of me know what they were called in the finished game. Yes, that was definitely slapstick humor. What program do I used to draw these? This is Procreate on an iPad, which is just fantastic software. I use this, or I use Clip Studio, but it really depends on the task that I'm trying to do, because Procreate just makes it a lot easier for me to do the kind of more sketch-oriented elements. It even though I'm working with pretty great digital tools, it's very, very approachable. So it's easier for me to get in. I'm not as worried about the technical side of things. And one of the things that always bothered me about Photoshop is it is such a functionally powerful software that it's kind of always doing things that I don't really need it to do. And that's just hogging up the RAM, and it's wasting a lot of resources. And so that the drawing process would be, maybe it wouldn't be as smooth as I'd like it to be. So this is doing 120 hertz refresh on it. So what's great about that is I can't really see the refresh process. It's so fast that it just looks like I'm just drawing, and it just happens to be on a screen surface. But it happens so quickly that it's super smooth. It's buttery, so that makes it easier for me to get the stuff done. I can't remember now how I can never remember my own characters. I'm trying to remember how I designed the bottom of her shirt. Hey, Dina. So, Banana Meteor, what are you drawing? I am curious. What are we working on? Yeah, one of the things that I do with this character is I have her, like I alluded earlier to the fact that she is kind of a little bit more elongated than she is in the final design, but that's only kind of half true because what I do with her sometimes is I kind of stretch her out here and there as needed for the particular posing. So it's like if there's a situation where I need her to kind of stretch, because her a lot of her poses and expressions are exaggerated, just a little hyper real. You know, they're not. She's not really in the same sort of human category as Sarah is. So she's going to transform occasionally. Um, so I play with certain things that kind of emphasize this hyper real aspect of the character. Hey there, hot buns. I always feel weird saying that. You're getting into felting, and you're starting a gooba from Viva Pinata. So there's a Goomba and a Gooba here. Um, if that isn't total gibberish to you, yeah, no, I played a bit of Viva Pinata. I didn't finish the game though. I didn't finish the game, but it was super cute, and it was a nice change of pace at the time. I remember for Rare, very different from what they had done before, which was kind of what Rare was known for, was doing things that were different than what they did before, I guess. Although I do know a whole lot of people who would love to see him do more of what they did before. Hey, just me. There's really no other game quite like it. Yeah, it is underrated, for sure. Your name is short for your usual username, Hot Cross-Eyed Buns. Okay. It works both ways, and in both cases, it's funny. Can I give tips for selecting brushes? Well, that depends. I would say that it really comes down to what the overall style is that you're trying to do, you know, because different brushes are going to give pretty different results. It also depends on what software you're using because different programs work with brushes differently. So in the case of Procreate, it has a pretty good set of brushes already. In fact, I haven't really made too many of them. But don't be overly reliant on brushes or feel as though if art is not really working digitally, then it's due to the brush because you can end up going on a kind of a never-ending hunt for the perfect brush and just kind of never really get there because the thing is a lot of it is just getting to get comfortable with drawing digitally, and I think the brushes are part of that for sure. I would say that we'll put it this way: it's kind of the same as it is in with real media, where if it's something that is you don't need expensive tools, I guess, to make great art, but it's kind of hard to do a great painting with really bad paint. You know what I mean? Um, so the brush does make a difference. And in this case, like I am using this pencil brush, which is just the standard 6B brush for Procreate. So this just came with the program. But again, if it, yeah, and this is an improvement, I think, on the pencil brush that I was using previously, which was in a different program. So yeah, but think about what it is you're trying to do first. I think that'll help you figure out what you're really looking for with a brush. One of the hardest things to draw is the eye position when you have a relatively symmetrical and we'll say, even face layout. It's very difficult to do. And I do tend to shift around kind of where I start, kind of how I start pieces. In this case, I started the way that I did because I'm keeping most of what I have here with the original. And I'm just making some changes stylistically to have it sync up with the newer art style that I'm using. So I hope that's useful for you. And if more what you're asking is like, where do you get specific, high quality brushes, there are a number of people and companies out there that do make pretty nice digital brushes that you can use. In fact, I've got one here that I bought, this watercolor pack. I don't remember what it's called or where I got it, but the pack of brushes is just called the Watercolor Max Pack. If you look up Procreate Watercolor Max Pack, you'll probably find it. But this is a really cool brush. I'm going to show you what it looks like here. But like there are a ton of them, but it creates a fairly realistic watercolor effect. And then it has like softer brushes. So it's designed to basically work with the limitations of trying to do watercolor digitally. Since it's not actually working with water, of course, it's you're kind of stuck having to use these digital tools. And unless the system has some sort of a watercolor function, it's kind of hard to make it look natural. But you can see how I'm using the smudge tool with a softer one of them, like this watercolor bleed opaque. That lets me, kind of eat into the hard edge of this a little bit. And I can combine that also with erasers. There are eraser tools, like this, for example, this bloom brush, or so you can eat away into it as well and still do it with a watercolor like texture. So anyway, it's pretty cool. And depending on what your needs are, like that would be a reasonable way to get a watercolor effect. How far do I plan to get before starting the crowdfund? That's a good question. I'm leaning toward a bit of a surprise launch, which I'm not really keeping it as a great surprise, but I really want to try and shoot for next month because I'd like to have it before the end of the year. And the problem is if you have it too close to Christmas, then it's hard to get. At least this is my theory. I don't really have any science behind this, but I think that people are less likely to back a Kickstarter when it's close to Christmas because, people tend to be spending money on Christmas presents and there's just kind of, the idea of spending money on something that is not even going to come your way until the following year is a little bit riskier, I think, around Christmas time. So I worry about losing support if it happens too close to Christmas. So if I want to do it this year, I basically have to be finished by around mid-November. So basically what we did with the Yuka campaign literally, it was the same situation. I wanted to get it going before the new year. And it just made a lot of sense to do it through October. So I'm thinking like mid-October is probably when we're going to launch. But I still have to do a few things. I still have to make my video. You really need a video. And that's going to be some work because I got to do some live action footage with that. And, you know, I have to make prints of stuff so that I can film them with my camera. You know, it takes probably a good solid week or so to get the video made if I do something similar to what I did with Yuka. So it's a fair amount of stuff that I have to get done. You know, and if worst case scenario is I could delay it maybe until January, but I would really rather not do that. Of course, the good news is the longer I delay the Kickstarter, the shorter a wait it will be post Kickstarter to actually get the book. Because one of the things that I'm kind of trying to get past with this is I want to get the thing mostly ready to go, which was not a benefit that we had with Yuka. And Yuka, as you know, took quite a while to get made. So I'm kind of trying to avoid that. I don't want people waiting forever. So the further I get into it, the less of a wait. And the thing is, if we do finish in like mid-November, I really only have about another month to maybe 2 months of creative work to do on it. So it'll go right to print pretty quickly. Yes, Christmas tends to be an expensive time for people. So yeah, I'm thinking about that, and it's the same thought that I had with Yuka. So we just need to make sure that I'm not I'm not just shooting campaigns, you know, in the foot. Like there tend to be better times to do these things, and I want to do them at the right time. So this expression is a little tricky because what's happening here is kind of cool. This Dream Girl character has just appeared in Sarah's room. So she's not, we haven't seen her in the real world before this. There's been a hint of her being in the real world at the end of chapter 2. But we're not really sure if that was real or not. There was just kind of a vision. It was an indication that it's real, but it's not as crisp as this. She's literally in here, and she's telling Sarah that she's here to take her to Dreamside. So this is a kind of a big moment in the story because it's when the first Dreamside adventure will actually kick off. And because it is a significant moment, I've got to represent a certain amount of magic and whimsy in her expression here. So I'm going to do a couple of things, but I first just need to get the face in position, and we'll figure out some ways that we can push it a little bit. Yuka was worth the wait. Oh, that's good to hear. because that was a wait. That was a wait. And that's, part of that is where the influence comes from to do these live streams a bit, is because it's going to be, it's going to be a wait. And I figure I may as well bring people along for the ride who want to come along with the ride, because there's a lot of cool things to share as I'm working. There were a lot of moments like that in Yuka. There were some moments that I kind of wish I was live with Yuka, because there were some things that I had to figure out during production that were fun little experiments, and there were things that I ended up cutting that I honestly can't even remember. But there was just there were some times when I remember thinking, oh, this would be something fun to show the backers. But the problem is, since I wasn't doing live streams, I'd have to kind of take the time to, make some sort of visual presentation of whatever it is that I was doing. And all of that just took away from development, and I was already kind of behind. So one of the things that I really like about the live streams is that it kind of just forces me to expose some of the production challenges with Dreamside, and also some of the cool things that happen while I'm working. A little bit of a haircut back here. So I'm probably going to have her eyes glow, because I like the idea that she's kind of forming. She's taking form in a way. And it's almost like we're catching her before she completely forms. And one of the things that happens there is her... it's almost like her eyes, like the glow of her eyes might be sort of the first thing that appears. And then as she takes form, the glow dissipates. The thing about her, though, is she's a little tricky because she's confident looking, but she also is excited. She's genuinely excited to go on this adventure with Sarah. So I need to make sure that I communicate that excitement. Because if she looks a little too... they're kind of counter emotions. If she's too knowledgeable, too, there's kind of a hidden wisdom, then she won't have the same kind of playful likability that I think she needs. It's one of the reasons that characters like Link from Zelda have, they're kind of universally appealing, because they don't really have any hint of, I'll say, kind of sarcastic character elements to them. There's everything is kind of on the surface. And there's a lot of personal projection and design that you will do as the player of that game, or the reader of a book with a similar character. So I want the audience to make her a little bit kind of into what they want her to be like. And that requires me to give her a personality and an expression that facilitates that sort of reader by reader design, if that makes any sense. Tell your wife she did a bang-up job on those Crack and Stone masks. Love mine. That's fantastic. Yes, that was when I told a friend of mine that I had recruited her to work on those. It was he didn't believe me at first, but yeah, Yep, she did a fantastic job. She has an account called Page and Thread. She does sell handbags and wallets and stuff like that. I think her neck is a little too long. To shrink the neck, I've got to bring the whole head down. So I have to select everything. Sometimes when I'm getting a little lost in the anatomy, I need to draw out kind of the structure of things. So like get the the rib cage indicated, and I might sketch those kinds of things out, put in where the spine would be. So I get anatomical with it because it helps me make sure that the figure looks correct and not horribly distorted. As I mentioned before, I do pretty much just the one layer for line art. I don't, create a different layer to do the ink line on because I like to keep that kind of freshness and spontaneity that I got from the sketch as much as I can in the finished drawing. The structure of her. All right, somebody tell me what these would be called, because I never know what to refer to these as. I design them, but I don't know what they're called. These like leg warmer sort of looking things, but they're not really leg warmers. They're just a sort of decorative leg covering. So you tell me what to call them, and I'll call them that. All right, her lower legs here are too long. Sometimes I erase lines where there's a crossover, there's kind of like an intersection. I like to look for any opportunity I can get to eliminate line details. Because I find that the more that I can do it in the color, the better. Flare socks. Okay, that's the name to beat. So until somebody comes up with a better name, I'm going to call them flare socks. Flare socks. I like that. It's good to emphasize the strength of the line where there's intersections. So like here where the top of the leg meets this intersecting line of the shorts, the intersection helps create sort of an anchor. So the rest of the lines around it can kind of fade out a bit. You know, they're not as important. And I think good line art kind of moves from anchor point to anchor point. I made the characters a little unnaturally skinny in the previous version. Which, you know, there is a story reason behind that. I mean, Sarah is sick. She has cancer. And so there's a logic behind it. But there's a way to draw skinny that looks a bit more natural. And I wasn't really getting that. Wasn't really achieving that. Plus, if you draw the characters to look too spindly, I guess, then you actually remove the realism. And I'm trying to increase the realism with this newer style. I got to put something on. What do we get? I've only had one company yell at me for playing their music. I listen to a lot of old school soundtracks. There's a lot of 90s era JRPG influence in Dreamside. So the Dream Girl, one of the things that I alluded to the other day is that her hair kind of doesn't really obey the laws of physics. And I suggested reasons for that. And one that I forgot to mention that was part of her original design is that she kind of herself resembles like a plant or a flower. And so she kind of projects upward. But yeah, the hair kind of points up. It's got sort of a character of its own. Favorite soundtracks? Oh man, there are a lot of them. Probably soundtrack-wise, at the very top would be the Chrono games like Chrono Trigger and Chrono Cross. I used to put Chrono Cross on, I'm going to say daily, at some point when I was working on this years ago. I like anything by Hamauzu, who's known for doing the newer Final Fantasy, some of the newer Final Fantasy scores, but I kind of like him back from the PS1 days when he did the Saga games. Although he's a pretty amazing composer. Really like the Unlimited Saga soundtrack. Not a very fun game, but a fantastic soundtrack. I think that game existed just to sell the soundtrack. I listen to a lot of Dave Wise stuff too. In fact, when I was working with Michael, who is the composer on the video series, I was referencing a lot of Dave Wise DKC stuff, particularly the Stickerbrush tune, which I thought sort of encapsulated the fantasy feeling that I wanted Dreamside to have. Because that tune is kind of this euphoric. It's kind of emotional, but it's also got kind of a. I hear it described as relaxing. It is. I think it's relaxing, but there's kind of a. I don't know. It's hard to describe. It's hard to put it into words, but it's a song that when you listen to it, it kind of takes you away in a very pleasing way. I guess euphoric would probably be the word I'd choose for it. And Dave did that with a number of his tunes. Every now and again, you'll find one that's it just kind of takes you away. have to be careful with the eye positioning to make sure that she's looking toward us. So in this one, the idea is that we're at Sarah's perspective, her point of view. And so the dream girl is looking at us. So the first time she's in the real world, she's looking at us, which will be one of those kind of magical experiences for the reader if I can pull it off. Because, of course, the reader is being pulled into Dreamside. So much of this process is just looking at what is broken and then fixing it. Use Viva Pinata score for your wedding procession. Really? That is kind of cool. You should tell Grant that. You should definitely tweet that to him if you haven't, because that will make his day. Grant is one of those people who, in my mind, can do no wrong. And that's funny because apparently he does a lot of things wrong. But not really. But he is. I have so much to be thankful for with Grant, because we'll put it this way: the Yuka project and really what I'm doing right now would not be possible without Grant. Because Grant is really the one who helped make the connection happen with Platonic. So it's he's. I won't say that he didn't like put on a huge song and dance or anything, but he's still the reason that they were willing to talk to me in the first place. And Grant and I had gotten to know each other a little bit when he had moved out to Los Angeles, because I was living there at the time, and we had some game industry conversations and things. And I reached out to him initially because I had found out that he had moved to the States, because he was working with what is it? A company called Big Huge Games, that made this title called Kingdoms of Amalur. So he was on that, and that was like the first game he worked on when he moved to the States. And then he had been starting to do some contract stuff and was kind of thinking, whether or not he wanted to move into a full-time job or, on a state contract, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't want to get into too many details about it because I don't know what Grant would want me talking about, but there were some things that I tried to do for him to kind of give him a hand with something. And I think he turned around and reciprocated that. So, as I said in the stream yesterday, there's nothing more powerful than reciprocity when it comes to opportunities in life. Is people seem to really want to go out of their way to help people who help them. I know I do. I mean, I feel like I owe my backers for life. I mean, it'll get really annoying how much I say thank you over time. But it's really true. It's something that I feel strongly about. It's like you can't quite understand it, I think, maybe, unless you're in the position. But for me, to have people actually support financially, put money behind something without really knowing me, or what I do, what I would be able to do, and whether or not I was going to be some jerk who would take the money and run. It's like, and the worst part is that had kind of happened with that Triforce statue thing, which was a nightmare. I was not happy the day that I found out that happened because I knew that we were going to be moving forward pretty soon with the crowdfund for Yuka. And I thought, oh, everybody just put every dollar that they're willing to spend on Yuka extras into this statue. And I shouldn't be talking about that. But yeah, that damaged the reputation a little bit of people who were, we'll say, third-party makers of Yuka-related merchandise. So, wish you had a video to show him. Grant's a hero. What a guy! Yeah, he really is. He's a genuine guy. And the other thing about Grant is he's so approachable, which is kind of the point I was making just a minute ago. Is he despite his industry status, he does not put himself above anybody. And anyone can approach him. He somehow finds the time to respond to people individually. So I'm very impressed with that. Not only is he hardworking, but he's busy, but he has a family, and he takes the time to talk to people who message him. So he can do no wrong as far as I'm concerned. I would call him a friend. I don't think he would call me a friend. He would say, "Oh, it's that." Well, first of all, he would say things about me that I couldn't understand because I can never understand what he's saying. He has an extremely thick accent, which made talking on the phone very difficult. I think at one point we were going to meet for lunch, and we were talking on the phone. It was before, I think it was before we were even connected on like Facebook Messenger. It was a while ago, and I had I called him to see where he wanted to meet for lunch. This is in Los Angeles, and we literally I couldn't understand what he was saying, and I'm like, you know what? Let's just text. If I make a figure of reality, then I owe you nothing. We are square. We are square. Okay, well, that's on the plan. That's in the works. It's just I'm putting things in order here. I think the reason that I want to do Dreamside first, and this is going to sound so businessy, but I have to think about what things people will cross over on. And I thought what I don't want to do is wait until Dreamside ships to do the Yuka statue, but I also don't want to do the Yuka statue first. And the reason for that is because I think that the Yuka statue would actually get a pretty fair amount of people who back the book would probably back that campaign. But I don't know how many of them will back Dreamside. But what I really need people to do is back Dreamside because this is kind of the long form project. There's 6 books in this series. It's been a passion project forever, and I'm trying to really commit to this and get this going. So my theory was if I did the Yuka statue first, then people will probably back it and then they'll like wait for that and not support Dreamside. Whereas if I did Dreamside, I kind of feel like if I then do the Yuka statue prior to fulfilling Dreamside, I think that there will still be a fair amount of people that would come back for that Yuka figure. If that makes any sense. So I think both campaigns will benefit from Dreamside coming first. I have to think about these kinds of things. So I don't know if that's true, but it just makes sense to me. The Triforce thing was just an absolute nightmare. Yeah, it was so terrible. I know that Platonic and Team 17 and all, they would just as well rather people forgot about that entirely. But I guess somebody had just had just taken the money from the company and ran. And so they really screwed over Platonic on that. You know, because Gavin, who is the head of the company, is extremely trusting. And that really burned him. You know, because of course that it's kind of like it. I had nothing to do with Triforce, but it still will be the kind of thing that I would get graded on. You know, because it's like if I'm going to do a Kickstarter, you know, it's going to inherently be affected by the nonsense that happened with that. You know, because I'm just another name that people don't know. And here I am asking for money for something for Yuka, and it's like, would people trust me with it? Would people be so burned by Triforce that they would not? So that was a real problem. It was very, very stressful. I remember being worried at the time that had burned them so badly that I was thinking, you know, I still did not have an agreement, like a contract with Platonic, even though I had been working on the book for a long time, because it took us a long time to establish our contract. Everything was very trusting, you know, they're fantastic. They're very trusting on their end. And I was trusting of them that they wouldn't, you know, cancel the project on me. But at the same time, when that Triforce thing happened, I thought, you know, what if they tighten up from this and they say, you know what, you know, we're gonna cancel this project because we don't want any more brand damage as a result of that statue issue. But that didn't end up happening, so that was good. And I delivered; they didn't. And now I'll deliver their statue. So, payback. The best part about it is I was thinking about this and I thought, you know, I need to design a statue that's, you know, going to be somewhat distinct. But they did, you know, the design of their statue was excellent. It was great. It was really cool. And I thought, you know, what's funny is if I actually did base it on their statue, I'm thinking, what are they going to do? Sue me? I mean, it's not like they'd have a leg to stand on, right? If we basically just took their design. But I do, you know, I did look into vinyl production, and it's definitely, it's not that it's expensive, it's that it's potentially extremely expensive if you don't get your quantities up to the level that they really have to be. So that's kind of the issue. There are limitations in terms of what I can do without knowing that we're going to hit the kind of numbers that I would need to do the statue for a reasonable price. So I don't like, I mean, I basically, what I'm thinking right now is to basically put something out there that would be like one figure and just make it like an oversized figure. We were originally going to do like 4 individual character figures, but the problem is each figure has such a huge startup cost that it doesn't we just can't really afford it unless if it was something that was super popular and we knew that we were going to sell like thousands of them, it would be different. But the problem is with Yuka, I mean, the book itself sold maybe about 1,100 copies, 1,200 probably, maybe 1,300 at most to date. So it's a little hard to justify with the multiple figures. It's hard enough justifying one figure. So what I thought made a lot more sense was to do one that's a bit more of a premium statue that would be not like the first 4 figures kind of thing. That's too expensive. But like something that might be in the $75 range or so, and maybe include some extras. But that would basically be it. Like the campaign would be for that $75 boxed figure. And we can do a box. We can do like I was going to do like a Funko Pop style collector's box, like the windowed box, which are cool. I think collectors like those a lot because you can open the box and take the figure out without destroying the packaging. So for collectors, they tend to like that. Probably shouldn't be giving all this away. Yeah, I think with the Triforce figures that exist, I having looked into it myself in terms of how these things are produced, I think I know what they did. I think what they did was they got prototypes made, because when you do a figure, right, one of the options that you have, and we'll definitely be doing this, is you pay a smaller amount of money to basically have them make one figure that is like from start to finish. Okay. So you can kind of see what the final thing will look like. I think what they did with their scamminess is they had several prototypes made. So, let's say it costs like $500. So you would make a prototype for $500, right? So what they did, I think, is they made basically 3 or 4 prototypes. So they don't actually have a line, but because the figure existed and because it was real, people think that it was real because they see this prototype. But in reality, I think what it was is it was just a designer prototype that they got made to basically show what the final would actually look like. So that's what's really annoying about it, is they essentially had 4 custom made or 3 custom made, or however many were made. Might only have been 2 or something. Um, that they made and then sent to Platonic and I guess to some other people. Maybe I know there was one like in a convention or something at some point, and so that people can see it being real. And then it's like, okay, then you plunk your money down, because when I saw the figure originally, and that's another thing that I can say that I think this was a scam from the beginning, is that looking into the pricing of it, because I think that was a resin statue, and it was huge. It was like 10 inches, maybe 11 inches. I don't know, but it was really big. And there is no way that you can do that figure at that cost. That's a resin statue with all the other extras, including the box, for what they were charging, which I think was like $65 or something. It was like $60. I think it was $59.99, which is impossible. So there's just no way it can be done for that cost, because that figure was essentially a first 4 figures caliber figure, and those typically go for like $250. Which is about what that should cost, because it's like it might cost the manufacturer like $75 to make that one figure. So they can't charge like $60 for it. Just they would lose money. So I don't think that was ever real to begin with. I think it's just they were kind of playing on the fact that maybe Platonic, for example, does not know what it costs to make a figure, and they kind of just are willing to trust this company. And the worst part about it is that they had delivered in the past. I mean, they had examples of figures that they had made, and they did have a track record. I think they were really behind on some of them. I think that's kind of what happened, is that the company overshot a little bit, and they kind of panicked because they had probably collected and then spent a lot of people's money because they didn't balance their costs. And I think the guy, whoever was the owner, probably just panicked and fled because he was worried about the legal repercussions, or having to, refund people all that money that they didn't have anymore because they spent it all. That's just my guess. Yeah, 60, but 50 if you were a backer, right? So they gave you like a like a coupon if you were a backer for the game, right? Forgot about that. Yeah, but that's just impossible. There's just no way it can be done for that. And that's assuming that you're going overseas to Asia for manufacturing too, which is, the cheapest way you can get them made. Because there are there are companies in the states, for example, that will do figures, and I looked into that. But the only way, first of all, they either themselves will outsource to China, and then they're kind of like a middle person. Or they can make them in the States, but the costs are stratospherically high. So most companies will go overseas. I'm not super crazy about Chinese manufacturing because you don't really know the practice, you know, how their operating standards are, and you know, if they're running conditions that are unethical. It's difficult, you know, to figure some of that stuff out. You kind of have to go off reputation and what other people say. So you have the Banjo and Conquer statues, the ones from first four figures. I think kind of like before, I'm going to retain a lot of this bed here because I don't know that I really need to redraw that. I don't know that I'm crazy about the vine idea anymore. I like the idea of doing a kind of an abstract floral design that appears, but I don't know if I want to connect the drawings together anymore because that's what I did here before. Yeah, so what happens is these vines come out of the ground in Sarah's patient room, and then it kind of draws our eye over to the right where she's introduced. But I don't think I like this idea. And I kind of feel like I want to blow her up a bit more. I'm gonna back out of this. This is how I this is how I make backups. I just duplicate it. And now I can play around with this. So I can select both the color and the line. And I can enlarge it a little bit. So I'm kind of thinking that's what I want to do. Maybe tilt it. Now, before I had text, but I think all the text was on the left side. Yeah, I don't think there's anything on the right. Yeah, I think what I'm going to do, move this this down a little bit. I think what I'm going to do is get rid of Sarah in terms of her. Maybe I'll leave her in there. I was thinking that I would do a close-up of her feet around the vines. Plus, this pose is really off. I need to rethink that. All right, I'm just going to scribble in a new Sarah drawing, and then I'll decide if I want to keep it. Yeah, you can see how spindly I had her here. This is so far off from the right look for her. Sarah kind of withdraws into herself a little bit when she's nervous or scared. She kind of bunches up. Yeah, totally rethinking this pose. It's funny. I might have mentioned a few times that I trained as an animator, and one of the things that to kind of drill into your head as an animation student is that there is, exaggeration is better than no exaggeration. And while that's true to a point, I've always had kind of a problem with that because sometimes, depending on the style that you're picking and the realism that you're going for, that's not always a good direction. I mean, I suppose if you're doing, crazy cartoony Tex Avery, Looney Tunes type of stuff, or, you know, it makes a lot of sense. But sometimes, sometimes subtlety is called for. So I don't exaggerate quite as much with Dreamside because it's not really a goofy story. To me, an interesting pose is one that's going to have an interesting silhouette. That's pretty much my rule. Is if it would look good if it was just pure black on white or white on black, then it works because that means that it's very readable. What's tough is having a good silhouette with a really subtle pose because people in general, when they're doing kind of realistic motions, we don't really pose ourselves in ways that are extremely identifiable if you just saw the contour. Sometimes these are a little harder to work out than others. So in some cases, if I'm working out a pose like this, I might do a draw over. So I do kind of like a second layer to kind of clean it up. So this is the only kind of time where I make a second line art layer. But it's not because I'm trying to do a solid line. It's because I'm still working out the pose. I haven't quite nailed it. Let's say I really do a lot of that mirroring to check poses as I'm working out the shape of things. As it really helps me stay on track. And the more frequently I do it, the better, because I want to catch problems as early as possible so that I don't spend a lot of time gradually refining an area that's just not going to work. This is a look of surprise for Sarah, but I don't want it to be. She's not scared because, kind of in her mind, she knows that she's not. This is not like a scary thing that's happening. She's more surprised that it's actually happening, but I got to be really careful that I don't make her look frightened. So I have to keep editing this until it gets there. Getting close though. One of the fun things about doing clothing wrinkles and things is that you can indicate the movement of the character, even though it's a still image, right? Because like if I just do a little bit of a tail on the shirt like this, it will indicate that she's moving backward. Yeah, she's in the process of turning around. I have this incredible David Lynch coffee. I can't get enough of this David Lynch coffee. I can't get enough David Lynch, and I can't get enough of his coffee. When it comes to this kind of thing, it's, you get there if you just do it enough times. You get the pose that you want. It's easy for me to see what's wrong, but never really can I see what needs to happen to make it right until I just go step by step through it and I realize what has to be edited. It's a challenging process, but it's really rewarding when you figure it out, which is great. That makes it worth it. But it's also one of those things that there's a pleasure in taking the time to really figure out these poses. It's worth it because if you get them wrong consistently, this is one of the challenges with comics. The reader gets sort of a cumulative impression of your characters. So everything that you get wrong counts against the design of the character that you're trying to do. So if you do it here and there, it's fine. But if too many instances have you getting off model with a character, and I don't just mean in terms of the physical, the appearance of the character, but also just the acting, the posing, everything. If it's not consistent, it's hard for the reader to formulate a clear idea of the character, and then the characters don't feel real. So it's important to take the steps necessary to work out just who this character is. And every little thing that you do conveys a bit about them. There's a way that when Sarah steps back like this because she's surprised, she steps back a certain way. It's a little bit different than how other characters would step back. She kind of raises her leg like this. She brings her elbows in close to her chest. There's a certain language to this that if you were to see the silhouette, even if you didn't recognize the character, you could, and you were just to go off the feeling of the pose, then you would say, okay, that seems like a Sarah pose. That seems like that's her. And that helps the reader recognize her. and know that it's her, not just because it looks like her, but because it acts like her. If I tilt this foot up like this, it makes it look like she could fall, which I think emphasizes the surprise. You wouldn't believe it if I told you, but Sarah's hair is consistently the hardest thing I've ever drawn. And it's so short. But that's just it. It's extremely hard to get it just right because there's no room for error with it. So she has a certain kind of iconic shape for her hair, but it's very, very hard to get just right and also make it look appealing. Really tough. She's actually a really hard character to draw. Because there are a lot of ways that you can draw a character that looks kind of like Sarah, but doesn't really look like her. You got to really get it just right. One of the influences for Sarah's design is the childlike empress from the Neverending Story. Okay, I'm going to delete the old one here because I don't need that anymore. One of the unfortunate things about Procreate is it has when you're working with high resolution files because because it is on the iPad, it's pretty limited in terms of what you can have layer wise. So we can't afford a ton of layers. So I need to eliminate them here and there. But let's compare it to the old one, which of course is colored, so it's not quite a fair comparison here. The other thing too about the old Sarah design here that I don't like is that the outfit that she has is a little bit too energetic, which does not really fit her design. Yeah, she's posed out like she's trying to mime a monkey. Like it's neat, but it's a little too exaggerated and cartoony. Although I do like her Robotoids. shoes. Roblotoid, see? So yeah, I do think this is an improvement. So to make sure that she's actually looking at one of these holes in the ground that forms as the vines grow out of it. So I'm just going to have one vine that connects the two here, because I do like the idea of it connecting, but I just don't want to go as crazy as I did here before. How we doing? Anybody working on anything interesting? Banana Meteor just checked out your tweet. Fantastic. Yeah. And as predicted, there's Grant. I knew he would get back to you. Case in point, just the way that he is. And that's a beautiful picture, by the way. So since this is breaking through the wood plank, the wood flooring, rigid objects really don't, curve, don't bend. So like if the wood is going to snap, it's going to snap into pieces that remain rigid. So in order to make sure that it looks like what it is, I've got to make sure that I don't have too many curves in here. Otherwise it won't look like wood anymore. Of course, there's a fantasy element here because this is, obviously a fantastical event that's occurring, and what's underneath the wood is not like, it's not the what's actually under the floor. It's more like there's a bright light shooting out because this is Dreamside breaking through into the real world. The doorway is opening. Yep. Happy to talk about that. And yeah, it's been fun to get to know people in the industry over the years. It's especially cool too because Grant made music that I really loved as a kid. So it's very cool when you find yourself working in the industry and connecting with them as professionals. That's a very cool experience. Awesome. Thanks for hanging out. Yep, I'll be coloring this one over the next few days, kind of like I did with the last one. So I'm sure it'll be a fun process. So hopefully we'll see you again soon. What are we thinking, folks? Poses look cool. Great. Yeah, the goal is to try and make them feel alive. So happy to hear that's working. So little things like this, as I look at this finger, I'm like, you know, if the fingers are spread a bit more, it communicates surprise a little bit more. They're kind of spread out a little bit. So if we can exaggerate that a little bit, that'll be good. But it's not like a hard shock, you know, where the fingers are like the hands would be out like a starfish, you know, because that would be a little too much. But in this case, it's more like light surprise. Her eye's a little off model here. It's just too far. Eyes are a little too far apart from each other. Yeah, it looks like looks like you keep the line art in the same layer. Yeah, that's I just found that works the best for me. I think part of it is also because I sort of I kind of sculpt sketch, so I need to work things over and over again, right? So if something's not right, I want to just be able to get in there and erase and then redraw, which is a very digital thing, because I can kind of keep manipulating this and completely erase the old line, which you can't really do with traditional media that well. At a certain point in time, you're erasing too much and you're going to eat into the paper tooth. And you're not really going to get anything else out of it. But with the digital stuff, you can erase, completely. So it's possible to make it look like a fresh line layer and get the same basic effect, even if it's not. I think I'm actually going to go ahead and bring some color stuff in here. May as well get started with that. So to keep it easy, I'm going to copy my color layer from the other page I was working on, and I'll paste that in here. And that way I can just pick from these colors. The reason I'm always rotating is because I'm trying to get the angle that my arm will be able to most easily draw. So I'm rotating it so that my arm can get the ideal angle. Otherwise, I'm trying to kind of contort my arm movement to fit a strange angle, which is not the easiest thing to do. It's easier for me to get controlled strokes if I kind of just keep moving my arm in the same way and I rotate the canvas around it. Shadows are probably the most fun. I think it's the most fun process to work on. Like the one story I told about someone at Disney and compared the sloppy first piece to the redrawn clean one, how everyone liked the first piece more. Yeah, right. That's yeah, that was an animator friend of mine at Disney who I think when I first heard that, um, I had shown him some art that I had drawn for a project for something, and I did sort of like a cleanup over it. This was actually in a sketch pad too. This wasn't digital. And he reacted because he noticed that I had a few drawings that were still in the rough style, just like a sketch. And he said, to be honest, there seems to be more life in your sketches than in the finished pieces. So it's like he was basically saying, leave it in the sketch phase because it looks better. And he was right. I look back and forth between them, and there was just a lot more energy to the rough sketches. But the problem, of course, is that if you're trying to clean something up for an illustration at a certain point in time, you're gonna probably want to solidify things a little bit, unless you're going for a very rough final design, which is also that's fine too. That's not though exactly what I'm going for with Dreamside. Although one of the things that I did with the simplification process that I have here is agree that things can look a little sketchier than they were, because in the Dreamside art before I had really solid outlines, and not only did they look a little less lively, but they were also kind of taking a long time to do. Mm-hmm. Thinking about doing some major redesigns and improvements to your own characters. I used to hold back and change my mind, remembering my past self and how happy I was about them when I made them. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's worth it to revisit old work and see what you can do with it now. For one thing, it's very rewarding to see your own progression as an artist. The things that you struggled with in the past that maybe, if you've been keeping at it, you don't struggle quite as much anymore. That's pretty rewarding in and of itself, and that gives you a lot of encouragement, I guess. That will keep you feeling good about yourself as you're working on more stuff. So that's good. But yeah, and especially if you intend to use them, even in cases where you have famous characters like say Garfield, for example. Garfield's gone under many renovations, revisions, but the character is very different now than what he used to be. Um, and that's a case where Jim Davis didn't hold out on releasing the character or anything, but even once the character was out, there was still an opportunity there, to revise. I see what you're saying. Well, that's good. I'm glad that this could inspire you in that direction. I think that the old design had value, for sure. But it's just not really quite what the character is supposed to be. Um, and it's for me with Dreamside, it's really just about making sure that it's true to the designs that it's supposed to be. You know, and that sometimes means that even if I have a design that's good, if it's not really communicating what I need it to, it's just not really going to cut it. You know what I mean? And that's something that I'm very used to in the industry, because oftentimes there will be situations where you work pretty hard on something and it might be great. It might actually be almost perfect. But the problem is if it's off what the project needs, if it doesn't really work with the story, um, it might need to get cut, even if it's great. Um, and I think a lot of uh, I think a lot of stuff that we've seen throughout the years has had the same kind of treatment. There's been a lot of cases where you take say classic movies that have great designs that and love. Um, there were probably a lot of things that wound up on the cutting room floor. It's because that's kind of how that goes. There's not room for everything. These streams are turning out to be good for me because they're forcing me to commit, because I don't want to look like a bumbling fool while I'm on here. I'm having to make some decisions as I go that I might have spaced out a little bit more otherwise. So this is good. Things that I think are good for everybody, those are good things. If you can get something out of these, then great. If I can get something out of these, then great. And if we both get something out of it, then they're pretty valuable. Mm-hmm. Designs are so drastic, sometimes you'd end up using them for a brand new character with a more fitting personality. Yeah, that's another thing too, is that when you experiment with characters, you sometimes will come up with ideas that are good. They just don't quite fit this right here and right now. But that doesn't mean that you won't come up with another use for it later on, like you say. So that's very helpful. So it's good to kind of retain these ideas. There are things that I've come up with that I've had nothing, I guess, project wise that I can use them in, but I sort of just shelve them, and then they will usually end up coming up later on, even if it's something that I don't think I'm ever going to be able to do anything with. And here's one of my favorite things to do. I love these little wrinkles, these compression wrinkles that happen when you get like two objects colliding with like a soft fabric, and you get these little wrinkles that show up as a result of it. It's just, I love how realistic they make it look. You keep thinking about what I mentioned the other day about how appealing is more important than looking correct. And before then, I would be too worried about ruining a pic. I never considered that thinking too much is what I think has been making my art of lesser quality. Well, if you're focusing too much on realism, it's really a balancing act, right? You know, sometimes realism is the most important thing. I think a lot of that just comes down to deciding what is most important for your project. You know, looking at art from when I was 11 seemed so much better, even though it was kind of ugly. I just did what I wanted. Um, yeah, I think. Well, maybe part of that too is because what you're seeing is the kind of playful, inspired stuff that you came up with when you were 11, because you weren't as concerned about, anatomy and making sure that things are correct. Um, there's definitely a lot of appeal in children's drawings because they're generally not concerned with that kind of thing. So that does let the imagination flow a bit more. Um, so in order to open one window, you kind of have to close another, you know, and sometimes that means, because it's all really a balancing act, right? We only have so much energy. It would be great if we could, be perfectly imaginative all the time and also achieve, the level of realism that we want all the time, but it just doesn't work that way. It's a balancing act. And you have a choice of what you can spend your time on. So if the thing that's most important is realism, then go that way. But the thing is, you'll find, I don't think anybody will ever answer that question with realism being the most important thing. I mean, basically nobody will say that. Even people who are making very realistic projects, I think they don't want to think that the thing that's most important about what they're doing is that it's realistic. Um, so I would say that it's not that important. And also bear in mind too that people in general don't really care about that. That's kind of more a thing about that. That's the kind of thing that artists judge each other on. Okay, but people who just consume this stuff, they're not really concerned about that. They just sort of think, do I like it or not? There's even as an artist who is overly concerned with this kind of thing. There's so much media that I've consumed that I don't really think about. Like, I didn't say, oh, I'm not going to read this because the character is badly drawn in this panel or whatever, or it's not realistic. It's just, it doesn't concern me. If it's interesting, that's really all that matters. It's not all that matters, but it's enough to keep me interested, and I can see past the other stuff. It's really that kind of doesn't matter. That's one of the reasons I don't usually go to artists for critique, because artists think differently than your average consumer. And I'm not really making stuff specifically for artists. It's great if artists can enjoy what I'm doing, but I'm making stuff for people to enjoy and read, and I want to make books that kids can enjoy and that become classics. So I have to see past that. And it's not the same thing as saying, let things go or don't spend a lot of time on things. As you can see, I spend a lot of time on it, but for me, those are not interchangeable concepts. It's more that when I say that something doesn't have to be realistic, I mean, I'll exaggerate anatomy, but I want that anatomy to be, even if it's incorrect, I want it drawn well. You know what I mean? So it's not quite the same thing as saying that it's, not important if it's realistic. I hope that makes sense. Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, instead of second guessing stuff and scrapping pics, try to be more relaxed. As long as it looks okay, just break past thinking habits. Yes, because what'll happen is when you do that and you loosen up, you're going to start coming up with better art. That's the funny part, because you're going to feel better about what you're doing. Like I said, I think something I've said a few times is you can generally tell when art was made by somebody who's really having a good time, you know, and you can tell when it was made by somebody, you know, who kind of just wanted to get it done. That's readable. You can sense it in the work. And if you get to the point where you're feeling good about what you're creating and you're not beating yourself up over it, um, ironically, that's kind of when you'll probably start producing your best stuff, because it really is kind of, it's mostly in the mind. I mean, knowing how to draw things that you want to draw, that's a skill, you know, that you develop through practice. You know, I'm like, okay, I want to draw human beings. Well, okay, you got to practice and learn how to draw human beings. Um, but you know, if you don't quite get the muscle looking exactly right, but you convey, you know, and like the arm, the way the arm is bending, it's like, okay, it doesn't look exactly right, but um, you've got a really great readable expression and people understand what you're trying to convey, and there's beauty in other ways. That's going to probably be better received than something that had, you know, a perfectly drawn muscle. Because if it was true that realism was the most important thing, then nobody would like anything that wasn't super realistic. You know what I mean? Like realistic media would be the only stuff that people consume, right? Because it's like, well, I don't want anything that's not realistic, because realistic is the only way that it's any good. And there are styles, you know, that are they are designed to not look realistic. Like that's kind of the point of them, you know. So there's also stuff like that. So yeah, and don't overthink yourself to the point. I would say that anything that you're doing that causes you to give up or to stop drawing or to stop working on something, that's bad. Even if it's coming from somebody who's very knowledgeable. You know, somebody gives you critique or something and it results in you stopping, that's the worst advice ever. Okay. Or it might be that, you know, you heard really great advice and you just don't really want to do this stuff. It's a little hard to know, but I guess the best thing is to just kind of look inward and say, you know, what advice am I giving myself? You know, and is this actually helping or is it hurting? Because you might tell yourself something that works for somebody else. That's the other thing too, is not everything works for everybody. Everyone's got a slightly different way of working and a different way of thinking. No two artists are really exactly the same. So, you know, don't worry about it. If something works for somebody else, it doesn't work for you. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It just means that you might have a different way of thinking than that person. For shortened art is a challenge to draw, yeah. Something that can help a little bit with foreshortened art, and really with any sort of anatomical study, is to work with some 3D models. If you can figure out how to run 3D programs, it can be a great help because then you can actually create cameras with lens distortion and pose out figures and kind of see how things look when they're exaggerated. You can get software like DAZ 3D, um, which is really helpful for that kind of thing. And I think DAZ is free, at least it was. Um, so it's pretty useful for that. Or Poser or something like that. All right. Many artists have moved to social media to spread their art, but those places are so toxic, filled with people telling others, etc., etc. Yeah, I think that's that's kind of a new phenomenon, right? Social media in general is still kind of new when you put it in the grand scheme of history, and it's an interesting experiment, but it's also one that is inundating. You're getting a lot of information all at once from a lot of different sources, and it can be overwhelming. So it's important to remember to put that in context. I was talking to somebody the other day about the problem with social media and the way it's impacted news and the way we get information for all its benefits. It also has um, the ability for us to see the kind of news that would be filtered out of our day-to-day consumption because in the past, because maybe we would watch local news that would only have so much time to deliver the news, but now you can see any bad event that occurs anywhere kind of as it's happening. And that can be really overwhelming because we can only process so much. Creates the impression that there's a lot of bad stuff going on when in reality it might actually be that uh, those kinds of things were happening anyway. We're just kind of finding out about them a little bit more and a little more readily. But it can be overwhelming to kind of be exposed to it. So same thing, same logic I think applies to being an artist. People will offer you their perspective. Sometimes it'll come in a way that's not very healthy, and it's hard to parse that and walk away from it unaffected, especially if it's something that you really put a lot of effort into. So that's difficult to deal with. The benefits, I think, tend to outweigh the negatives because it's you kind of have to look at what social media offers that we didn't really have in the past. The ability for me to go independent like this is pretty much reliant on social media. I wouldn't have been able to do this kind of thing before. I mean, YouTube is kind of a form of social media, um, and the ability for me to spread the word about a Kickstarter, which itself is kind of a form of social media. It's just one that involves money. Um, but all of these social media platforms have kind of opened the gates for artist freedom, in terms of what we can do. So I think there are ways of trying to balance the bad with the good. I think that's what we have to do, is balance the bad with the good. And ignore the stuff that's driving you nuts, because that's just gonna make it hard to get your work done. Yeah, and sometimes people will just be jerks. Right? That's just the way it is. So when people are just being jerks, just you gotta look past that. Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah. I often think that people can sometimes be a little addicted to outrage. So it's like if you put something up online and there's a way to turn it into a bad thing, um, even if you had no such intentions, that's easy to do these days. Easy to do. Um, but again, it's the best thing that I can tell you with that is just keep doing what you're doing, regardless of what people tell you. If it's something that you want to do, I mean, if what you're doing is just the worst thing ever, then maybe listen to somebody. But I doubt that's the case. So don't let people bully you. They can say what they want, but don't let it change your trajectory. Deviant art. Yeah, that's a world that I don't know too much about, to be honest. I have, I think I made a page at one point, and then I put up a few pieces, and that was about it. um, yeah, yeah. A lot of times people are discouraging on social media. I think for the same reason that people are discouraging in the real world. It's just it's a different operation. People tend to put down people doing good things because they're jealous. There's some degree of um, maybe they're upset that that's not something that they can do themselves. Um, and I usually what I tell myself, and this is just something I do personally. This is why it doesn't really get to me. And I think this is, whether this is true or not. I think it's good advice to follow. Is I assume that anybody who is taking the time to put down my work or insult me in some way is probably less happy of a person than I am. And I assume that that comes from a place where the person is actually dealing with some problems, and it makes it a lot easier to deal with it because I just put it in perspective. I remember when I remember being a young kid, and my mom, who was just the best mom ever, I had the best mom ever. Um, I remember getting a video game magazine. It was like one of the third party ones, like Game Pro or something like that. And there was they had letters columns where people would write in letters. And I remember this one letter, this guy wrote in, I'll never forget this. And somebody was writing in, and they were just livid over some element of a game. And I can't even remember what it was, but they were really upset over this. And I remember um, this is basically the only time I ever said this was I was talking to my mom, and I said, "Hey ma, look, this can't believe this guy is making, you know, like like doesn't this guy have a life?" Because he's just going off on a tangent about um, some feature in some game, and I'm like, this is kind of ridiculous. Like why is he so upset about this? And then my mom said, "Well, that might be the one of the only things that he has in his life." So it kind of puts that in perspective very quickly. And of course, it doesn't mean that that's true. A person might just be complaining because they like to complain. But on the other hand, sometimes people over prioritize things because they have a very heavy uh, emphasis on the import of that thing. So when things that they like, are change around them in ways that they can't control, or um, there's something about it that bothers them. They have an over prioritization on having it their way for that thing because it's something that is extremely important to them. So anyway, I remembered my mom telling me that, and I thought, oh, it just instantly diffused the inordinate frustration that I was feeling about that guy. It just took it away because instead of being angry, I was kind of feeling bad for him. And if you ever want to take your rage away with somebody, just try and convince yourself that they're in a worse situation and that's what's making them act out like that. I think it's good advice. And if you're wrong, the worst thing that happens is, the person is just kind of a jerk. And if you're right, then, you'll be more understanding and empathetic to somebody else. So that's good. And I also found, what was funny is when I launched Yuka, um, I kind of had some experiences that were kind of similar to that, which I assumed would come up, where people would criticize the art that I was doing because it was a little deviated from the game design. And I figured that people would have some problems with it, and some of them would express their displeasure with it, and some people expressed their displeasure in ways that were nicer than others. But what was funny is in every single case, I really can't think of any. I had, I reached out to people directly who had issues with what I was doing. And when I talked to them about it, I found that it tended to kind of diffuse the anger a little bit. Because I think they weren't really used to the idea that, the creator of a project would reach out to them and say, "Hey, what do you think? Why, where are your thoughts coming from? And tell me more." And sometimes I think people just kind of want to be heard. So I found that was kind of effective at working with people who are expressing distaste with something. The polite way of putting it. But yeah, you do have places that kind of encourage bad behavior. Twitter seems masterful at that. Seems like it's just made for people to get upset. Lala's on the case. Yes, Twitter does seem to have some problems. Definitely has some issues. See, as I do highlights on the shirt, and it's very diffuse, which means it's very soft. There's not really a lot of areas that will be sharp with the highlight, because otherwise um, it won't look like it's like a cotton material. It'll look more like plastic. So we gotta make sure that we use very soft edge shadows, or very soft edge highlights rather. Yeah, don't stress out too much about social media. As with anything, if it affects the um, quality of what you're doing too much, then it's probably unhealthy. There's some sort of an unhealthy approach to it. So just make sure that whatever you do, if your objective is to create, that you keep creating and don't let anything get in the way of that. So if social media is making it hard for you to do that, then maybe get off it for a while. All right, we're getting up about 3.5 hours here. I'm going to take a little break here, and I might jump back on one later tonight, but I also might take a little time off here. So what are we thinking about that? I think that came out really well, and I haven't done any color variation on that either yet, which, you know what, I'm going to do that real quick, because why not? Why not? Okay, I think that's a pretty big improvement. And just for fun, I'm going to put back up the old one. So I can kind of compare the two. So yeah, I think the new one's a lot more realistic. So hopefully that conveys what I mean about getting away from the over-exaggerated posing. And obviously I still have quite a bit of work to do with the vines and the effects and all that. Because I do like what I did here with the effects, and I think that can be a similar thing that I do, but I think the character pose really needed some work. All right. Okay, cool. All right. Well, thanks for everybody for coming. This is great, as always. It's very encouraging to get your support, and I appreciate you spending some time with me today. So we'll see you next time. Have a good one.